Welcome to the presentation for History A-Level at Rugby High School. It's nice to have you with us, and hopefully the presentation over the next few minutes will answer all your questions, but if not, there's an email address at the end that you can email me on. My name is Miss Richmond. I'm Head of History and Politics. So our requirements at Rugby High are fairly straightforward in terms of predicted grades. If you are doing GCSE history, we would like you to have at least a grade 6. However, if you're not doing history, that's not necessarily a problem. It doesn't stop you doing history A-level, and it won't necessarily disadvantage you. There are obviously skills you will have learnt, but if you have English GCSE at a grade 6, then you will have the ability certainly to access history and to do very well, as some of our students do. So it's not something you should worry about if you haven't done history for GCSE. The most important thing really is to have a genuine interest and enjoyment of the subject. You get at A-level 6 periods a week, the equivalent of a whole day a week in school, not to mention the reading and so on outside of school. So you do really have to have that genuine interest and enjoyment. You also need to be willing to and able to read around the subject, not just the textbooks that we give you, but we will point you in the direction of articles and things like that that we would like you to have a look at. It is obviously a written subject. You will know that already. You do have to be able to communicate well on paper, and assessment for History A-Level is via long answers, essays and coursework itself. But it's not just about paper. In lessons, we do a lot of discussion. And so your ability to discuss and analyse, to get involved in classroom debate would be really good. The other thing we really like you to be able to do is to think critically, to question information that you're given, to analyse where it's come from, how safe might that information be to trust, how reliable. So they would be the skills that we would ask you to have, or to think about how far you have when you think about A-level. The first paper you will study, you study this in Year 12, is on Russia, 1917 to 1991. So this paper really looks at how the communist regime was established, how does Lenin come to power, how do we move from a situation with absolute autocratic czars or monarchs through an interim democratic situation into the communist states, and then how that works under Lenin, and how that changes and develops under Stalin and the later leaders. So we will look at things like industry and agriculture, people's lives, how media or culture were affected, the different experiences of women and children during that time, and so on. And then at the end of that topic, we will look at the periods 1985 to 1991, and we look at why communism falls in 1991. Why does it not last even longer? And we particularly use historical sources to assess that last piece of the topic, looking at why Gorbachev comes to power in 1985 but can't hold the USSR together. All of that will be assessed through essays, some of which will be breadth or depth on the content, and some will be about historical sources themselves. Paper 2, which you will study in Year 13, is part of a theme that edXL call, as you will have noticed, communist regimes. And this looks at Mao's China, particularly 1949 to 1976. And so again, you will look at similar themes. How does Mao establish the communist regime in China? You will also again look at things like how that changes developments to industry and agriculture, and particular events such as the Cultural Revolution, the impact on social and cultural changes and attitudes towards women, religion, children, and so on. Again, this paper will be assessed via essays and source questions, but this is a slightly shorter paper, an hour and a half instead of 2 hours 15 minutes for the other two. This one studied in Year 13 because, as you will see, the sources here are more contemporary sources, and so they match nicely with the Ireland paper, paper 3. Paper 3 is an older paper. It's not the 20th century. You will see we're talking about the period 1774 to 1923. And we particularly look in this paper at Ireland and its relationship with Britain. So in this paper, we will study two aspects in breadth: Irish nationalism and then British reaction to that nationalism. So we look particularly at the groups that want to break away from British rule. How far do they want to go? What methods are they prepared to use? What exactly is it they're looking for? And how successful they are during this period. So we go in this period from Ireland being part of the British Empire, then to being part of the UK itself, and then eventually to being the Republic of Ireland as an independent country and Northern Ireland as being part of the UK in that partition as we would expect it to be today. We also look at some aspects of this period in depth. So we look at Catholic emancipation, how Ulster changes during this period of time. We look at obviously the seminal events of the Irish famine. And then we look at things like land issues and how working and living conditions changed towards the end of the period. This paper is again 2 hours 15 minutes long. It's 30% of the A level, as is the Russia paper, whereas China is 20%. This paper will be studied in year 13, along with the China paper, because they have very similar contemporary sources that they look at. Whereas the Russia paper and coursework, which I'll speak about in a minute, have very similar aspects of sources because they look at secondary sources, particularly the views of historians. The fourth component of A-level is the coursework component, and that's the last 20% of the course. This one is taught in year 12, and the way we balance our lessons is that 4 lessons will go on Russia and 2 on coursework. And in year 13, 4 go on Ireland and 2 on the China course. So in coursework, you do have a choice of different topics offered to you, such as we've given you some examples here. How the Tsar and Lenin, how authoritarian are they? How far could they be compared? We might look at the February Revolution of 1917 in Russia. So those 2 topics marrying in with the Russia topic from year 12. But we also offer some very different topics, different periods and different countries. So you could look at FDR and the New Deal and how successful that was. Or you could look at why Britain follows the policy of appeasement before the outbreak of the First World War and how that might be involved in that outbreak. Coursework itself involves interpreting and investigating either key individuals or key issues or events surrounding this time period. So you look particularly at the views of different historians and how they might differ on a certain issue, which is why we teach it with the Russia topic, which does a similar thing. The piece of work is somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 words, which asks students to show that they have an understanding of the work of these historians and that they can analyse and evaluate a range of source material in this way, particularly looking at the arguments that they might have used and which might be more convincing. As I say, this is done over 2 periods a week for the whole of year 12, so the coursework itself is expected to be completed by May, and then those lessons would be given over to revision for the summer exams. Coursework involves a lot of independent research and independent reading, but it also involves discussion with your teacher about how that reading's going, what you might have gained from that work, and how to go forward with writing it up. So you're not left entirely to your own devices to write those 4,000 words. Assessment for the 3 papers, as I've said, all takes place at the end of year 13. The Russia and Ireland papers are 2 hours 15 minutes long and contain 3 essays each. The China paper is slightly shorter because that's 20% of the overall A level, so it's an hour and a half and contains 2 essays. The coursework itself should be completed by May, and then that's internally marked and moderated so that that's completely finished before you start on year 12, before you then start revision for year 12 exams and move on into year 13. There are any number of careers for which history is useful. Some of the most obvious certainly include law, things like the civil service or local government, journalism, clearly teaching itself, but there are many others. really because of the transferable skills that history will teach you. The important things about history is that it really develops your powers of analysis. And universities like that. It is considered to be a particular use in many careers, particularly law, if you're looking at doing that at university. It shows that you can write coherent and logical arguments. You can take a large amount of information and reduce it to the pertinent facts. It also teaches you to be analytical and critical of that information and not to take things at face value, which is clearly the kind of skill which is becoming more and more important today. History goes with all sorts of other subjects, often done with English, both language and literature. Clearly, I'm going to advocate politics as well as being a very good balance for history, but it can go easily with things like sociology, classical civilization, languages, art particularly. That is not to say, however, it has to go with other essay subjects. And we often have students who take history along with science or maths to show universities or prospective employers that actually they are good at all those skills such as analysis, writing coherent arguments and so on. So there really is no subject with which history would be prohibited, and it would make sense to do with a huge variety of different things. We've just added here the 3-year average results of History A-level students. As you can see, we and the students themselves are rightly proud of what they've achieved and the hard work they've put in to be able to do this. These are just some of the comments from current history students we've put on here for you to have a look at. As you can see, they're doing a range of different subjects, but they would definitely recommend history. If you have any more questions or anything you would like to ask, my email address is coming up on the last slide. So we thank you for your interest in history, and we hope we will see you in September.